Welcome to Leadership Moments.
In every great leader's life, there are pivotal moments that shape their character, test their resilience, and awaken their vision.
Together, we'll uncover the invaluable lessons hidden within these transformative moments. Today, our guest is Jennifer Germaine. After spending more than 15 years as a corporate lawyer and scaling her own law firm to a national level, Jennifer gave it all up to be able to empower entrepreneurs and leaders to get to the root of who they are, cultivate the internal skills to communicate and lead with authenticity and empathy, and ultimately be a catalyst for influential impact on those around them. Jennifer's ability to break complex matters down to simple terms, elevate perspectives, captivate the room, and keep the audience asking for more makes her a highly sought after keynote speaker, thought leader, and transformational coach. Today, we are going to talk about how to create harmony amongst teams and how to read the real emotional response happening in the room. Let's jump in. Hi, Jennifer. I am so excited for you to be our guest today. You have some great stories and experiences that I can't wait for our listeners to hear. And I'd like to start with how you have a little bit of a unique experience as a leader and how you've had to lead through some situations. Would you like to dive into that?
Sure. Well, first off, Stacey, I'm happy to be here with you. This will be a fun conversation between the two of us. I'm looking forward to it. My background, I was a lawyer for 15 years before doing what I do now with is consulting and coaching leaders. And it was this interesting dynamic where I worked on boards of organizations. So when I would go into a room in decision making around whatever I was bringing to them that they were dealing with, not only was I representing the entire organization, but I'd be coming into these rooms to deliver information, ask them how they'd like to move forward of boards of 6 to 10, sometimes even 12 to 15 people. And then there would be the director or the main leader that was running the organization. That's a lot of people to get clarity around decision making. There's a lot of input always in those situations. There's a lot of disagreements. The boards were split in half and polarized. So there was one half of the board had to be represented, which were actually contractors and owners of companies. And then the other half were representatives of the employees or coming out of the union sector. And there were these joint boards. So they were all representatives of bigger organizations or associations, and they fell onto these boards. So there was a lot of all these different opinions, a lot of different agendas, and we had to remind everyone, like, which hat are you wearing? And that's actually a legal term that comes out of the Department of Labor and ERISA regulations, is like they're supposed to wear this certain hat when they're in the room, but that's tough to do as a human. So I was the one in there creating harmony from all of these different hats that people were wearing and all these different angles that they were taking around these very complex decisions that they had to make.
It's interesting how you talk about harmony and having to create that harmony. And as leaders, we often have to do that, but you're in a unique situation that people are told to wear a specific hat, make sure they're looking at a different view. What are some of the tools and techniques that you use that maybe leaders could take back to their teams and how to create that harmony?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I started to notice, because I was representing so many organizations, the ones that were thriving deeply, deeply understood that there's moments of our humanness where we're going to react to each other. And it's not always going to be pretty and it's not always going to be pleasant. And when that happens, to not use that against each other. Or if somebody steps to the side and they're really taking something personal instead of thinking for the bigger picture of the organization down the road, those moments happen. And the best boards and some of the tools I would use them to make them better is to remind them of the bigger perspective. What is actually the outcome that you're looking for the organization as a whole? And now when I do teaching, Stacey, I actually make them envision that there is a union or there is this bigger feeling of what the organization is trying to do together, and to try to keep the personal aspects and the personal ways that us as humans can take offense to sometimes what people are saying or how they're saying it or how they're delivering it, and leave that to the side and realize that that is not actually benefiting where we're trying to take the organization over the long term. Because the organizations I represented, they led and they taught thousands of people, 6 to 15 people that are making all the decisions for thousands of people that will impact it. And making sure that the personal and the subjective viewpoints don't get in is really important. The best boards knew how to do that exceptionally. And at the end of the
Yeah,
day, they got along really, really well.
that's great. And I love how you say union. You have to know that it's for the good of the cause. And as much as we try to do that as humans, sometimes we get that feeling inside of us. And we talk about the safe word. Is it a safe environment for us to act a certain way, be a certain way? And as leaders, we try to create that safe environment. So when you think about union, safe environment of all together, are there questions that we can ask ourselves as leaders, or we can ask our team to help make sure that we are thinking about the bigger purpose together?
I don't know if put it as questions. I do it as techniques in different ways. And I'll give you a couple of them. I do a lot of teaching of that we can personally react as a human. That's once somebody says something or how they say it can cause something, the feelings that you mentioned, to bubble up, and will somehow have what I call a default reaction mechanism go off. It's our way of being like, I don't like this. So some people push away, some people just stop talking, some people argue. There's different ways it comes across. And I always say that a lot of times that's unconscious. And when we're in a room together, the more we can educate ourselves that at times that's going to happen. And at times that leader will feel like they didn't have control over, and give them the benefit of the doubt. That's something that I always teach is give them the benefit of the doubt that they reacted in that moment. And that's not who they truly are at the heart of hearts. And when we start to come in, that's one tool that I teach all the time is let's just assume that that was a reaction that they've had for a long time. They didn't really mean to treat you that way. And let's come back to the table. Can we all agree on that? And then we can talk about how we'd like to do it differently and hope we can do it differently, but those moments will happen. That's one technique I use, Stacey.
I love that technique. Now, when you're in the room with the board, just to help me like visualize what this looks like, how long do you let that go? Do you recognize it and then you jump in fairly quickly? Do you let it run its course a little bit? Sometimes that's what we question ourselves as leaders. When do I actually jump in to help rally the troops again?
There's times when it does have to run the course because I wasn't coming in as somebody teaching them in the way where it was apparent. I wasn't leading with that. So sometimes you just have to allow people. There was a lot of anger in certain individuals. And if you allow that to just come out and come all the way out, and then the whole crew can move forward. But it's when everyone starts reacting to that, it kind of goes downhill. I would sometimes just do this pause with my hand. And somebody even asked me that I wasn't even aware that I started doing this, Stacey, to be honest. But I was in there. I wasn't the president of the board. I was just legal counsel. And I would just be like, I think we have enough information. And at times I didn't do that. At times it was so red hot where I had one group, they argued and screamed at each other for over 30 minutes. And it had been bubbling under the surface for years what was going on. That was one where you don't step in the middle of it. These two individuals were having a fight in the middle of the board. It hurt the whole board experience, but there was no way people were going to be able to step into this. And they were the strongest voices on either side. So there's been cases where it hasn't went very well. But a lot of times I just like silently would just be like, pause, hold up a hand, pause for a second, and people would just realize, just take a moment, take a breath.
What I love about that example is you were there for a different purpose, but you still felt the need and the right to raise your hand when you needed to and just kind of pause the situation. So you may not be the facilitator in a meeting or the owner of the meeting, but as a leader, it is your responsibility to recognize what's going on and do that pause or step in when it's necessary, or sometimes not step in when things just need to let happen. I want to get back into some other techniques. It sounds like you have some really good techniques for leaders to take in. Before we dive into that, though, we have a lot of leaders that as they level up their leadership, one of their goals is to become a board member and to be on a board. And as you have observed many board members, what would you say are some qualities that leaders should look for or try to be? What makes an excellent board member?
One, I feel the first and foremost thing is they should be passionate about the organization. So if they're not passionate about the cause and what's going on in the organization, don't just join a board to join a board, because I can feel that. I've also been a president of several nonprofit boards separate from what I was doing in the legal counsel, and people that aren't passionate about it aren't engaged, and they make actually not the greatest board members. The other thing I would say that's really important is let that passion lead you into finding where you would like to really contribute to the board. Because there's so many different seats that people can wear around a board and what they can contribute to it. And know what that is for you that you'd like to contribute and lead and let people know. The third piece is about getting on a board that I think is super, super important is build relationships. So if there is something that you're passionate about, don't let it think that I don't see how I can possibly get on the board. Start building relationships with that organization and the leaders of that organization, and then let them know, I've really thought about being on your board. And then once you continue to build those relationships over time, when a board seat opens, they'll likely look to you. Every keynote speech I've ever given, every board I've been asked on is always built out of relationships, an introduction from somebody back in, or me going from the grassroots up and saying, I would really like to be part of this, and I can help you guys any way I can right now until I become a board member.
Those are great advice pieces for people to think about. It still has to be your passion. Don't just do it to check the box. You truly have to care about it in order to be effective. So I love that. Okay, let's go back to your techniques. So you talked a little about one. I do a lot of emotional intelligence work. And I think a lot of the technique that you were talking about is understanding your own emotions in the moment and how that's affecting other people. So I love that piece. What are some other techniques that you tell leaders to help them navigate and just be better?
There's one interesting one that I use that people have reflected back to me has been the most beneficial part of their leadership. And it's actually when you're talking about emotional intelligence, it's being able to bring to the surface what's not being spoken. And I've had a lot of individuals have a lot of success with this. I know one individual I worked with for a while, and even it was just a month that I worked with him, and he came back and said his negotiations completely changed because he was able to bring up, I feel like this is going on in the room, but he never thought that he had the right to bring that up, or he always questioned whether what he was feeling was accurate. And I get that all the time from people is they don't think what they're feeling is what's really going on, or they doubt themselves that they should bring it up or that it can be brought up. And I always say, actually, that's usually the gateway to having a much more open conversation because everyone's feeling it. And I started doing this for myself when I would be selling into boards to get new clients, is I would go to board meetings and I would do my pitch and ask them for insights. Then there would be this feeling that I would feel, and I would skip over it and be like, but this is what I feel like was going on. And I was working with a coach at the time, and she's like, why don't you start bringing that up? And it completely changed the trajectory of my career. And now I teach it all the time to others. When you're feeling something, the elephant in the room, why don't you try to say, this is what I'm feeling. Is there any truth in that? Can you explain to me what may be going on for you? And do this pause moment and try to bring it up, but own it first for how you're perceiving it, and then allow the other person to tweak or tell you if it's right or not. It's almost like asking for consent to get feedback. Is this what you're feeling too or not? Is that how do you teach it? I'd be curious to know. It's like, what's your angle on it too, Stacey?
Yeah, very similar. And it's so true. You have the words coming out of people's mouths and you have the reactions, the feeling in the room. Sometimes it's the way they're sitting or looking at you or not looking at you. Our intuition can help us so much. And we really have to go with that gut. And I love how you brought up self-doubt, because what people don't realize is you're not the only one with self-doubt. All of us have it. A lot of people feel like it's only females that have self-doubt. I've had a lot of male clients come to me recently with self-doubt and how to work through that. So just know that when you have that self-doubt, you're probably not the only one in the room, and you're probably not the only one in the room that has that feeling. So that's what I teach people too, is how to bring it up. And I agree with you. It's, this is how I'm feeling. Is that correct? And giving the other person the room to say, no, that's not what I meant at all, because maybe they are sitting there with their arms folded or leaning back or something. And it really is because they're stretching their back or something like that, that they're having some back pain. Who knows? And they're really engaged, but they have to sit a certain way for a certain reason, giving them that ability to be able to say that. I think what gets really tricky is when they respond and maybe they're not being truthful to themselves, to you, and how to draw that out a little bit in a safe way. You're giving them the opportunity to say, "This is how I feel. Do you perceive it this way?" And they might say, "Oh, no, no, I'm good. I'm engaged." And you're like, "Really? Are you sure?" I think a way to respond to that is, "Okay, well, what piece did you like the most?
Mm.
What would you like us to work on?" So digging into that second piece, you don't have to call them out that you don't believe them, but you can ask another question that helps draw it out. Where do you think we could improve on? How could we do this differently? There's so many different ways that you could ask that to help draw that out a little bit. So those are some of the things that I do as well. Anything else you
Yeah.
want to add to that?
Yeah, I love everything that you're sharing, Stacey. And I've also told people that there's a lot in regards to, as a leader, trying to draw that out for the safety portion in regards to how you're positioning your body and the tone of your voice. So when I get somebody that's not comfortable sharing or they're not divulging, I'm picking up that they're not fully telling the truth to me. Sometimes I actually go back with my body, I sink lower and I go lower and slower with my tone. And I teach other people to do this. You're going to slow it way down so they feel comfortable. Because a lot of times we lean in. We're taught all the time, especially as women, there's a whole book on it, Sheryl Sandberg, like to lean in. And I say no, when somebody is feeling slightly threatened or they don't feel fully open, they'll get to that point where I don't really trust what they said. My intuition is telling me otherwise. Sometimes it's your body position and then go really slow. I just want to check in. If there was something that's going on here, would you be willing to even share it? Or what is your intuition saying that might be going on right now? Can you share that with me? But I go low and slow is what I always say to people. It's like sometimes it's in the tone of your voice and your body positioning. People will lean in and say that I didn't really trust what they were saying. And I was like, yeah, that's an aggressive position to take against another person still.
I love the low and slow piece, especially when we're passionate about something. One,
Whew.
we're taught that way, especially as females, but even men, if you really want something, you got to lean into it. You got to show that you take charge of it. And because of that, we're passionate and we're all excited. And there's so many actions that we might be actually scaring other people off. So it's a really good point. I actually go to the point that I make sure my chair level is, if I'm sitting and not standing, I make sure my chair level is set to the lowest level of the person in the room. So if you're sitting around the table and someone has their chair lower, I make sure that mine is lower because even your chair just being higher up sets a tone. And if you
Mm.
truly want to have collaborative environment, you need to put yourself physically at the same level as those people too. Now it's different when you're speaking and you're standing up in the room. It's another thing to consider is where are you height wise compared to others?
Yeah, that's really interesting that you say that. I don't know if I thought of it all the way through to that, but I know I was usually the only woman in a room of almost every board I was on. And I remember at one point, like I had to learn to take up more space to be able to get them to respond better to me. As my career progressed at the end, like I didn't have to worry about it because they knew who I was. But I remember thinking because of the atmosphere, which would be totally different if I went into a room that was more equal and or leveraged towards women. But it was really interesting that I had so many males in the room that I had to purposely teach myself to make myself bigger because I'm actually quite tiny in a room and in a chair. And then my chair is probably usually the lowest one in the room, so my feet can touch. So like I feel like that's my baseline, to be honest, Stacey. So I had to learn how to take a little bit more space up so I could be seen and heard in the room and they would actually start listening to me more. And it helped me a lot is when I started to do that. And then I would use more like spatial and even speaking people. I went through training and they always tell me, you're so tiny and little and your voice isn't the biggest projected voice to take up space. So that's really interesting. I'm going to have to think about that, what you just said about the chairs and let that. Thank you for sharing that.
You bring up a good point because it does depend on where you're at in your career too. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, we do look at title or who's the owner of the meeting, who's running and facilitating, and you immediately have a stigma, a stature that people are looking at. Where if you are newer, maybe on the team or in your career, you might have to take up more room. And it's not just being the only female in the room, it could be the only person of color in the room or the only male in the room. It's just that diversity spin of, am I the only X in the room? And how does that make me feel? And how do I do it? So I do agree with you that I think it depends on okay, where am I with this team and with this environment and in stage in my career? Do I need to take up more room, or do I need to make sure I intentionally take a step back to allow room for others? So you brought up some pieces about you have to have passion around boards. You have to be able to know your space. And you also do some keynote speaking, you have other techniques that you teach, and you're a transformational coach. The one piece that you bring back, if I know how to read the room, whether it's not just the words, that's the biggest piece. Is there another piece that you'd like to share with our leaders and our listeners that might help them to think about for their skills?
Let's talk about speaking for a moment, actually. I've been doing a lot more speaking, and a lot of people come sidebar me and they say, I've always dreamed of being able to do it. Or they talk about just the way you're able to confidently command a stage. So I was just in Vegas and I presented to 500 people, and it was all individuals that were leading educational institutions. And they're like, I wish my instructors were able to have the confidence you have on stage. I wish I had that confidence presenting into others. This dialogue happens often reflected back to me. And I always share at some point that I was one of the shyest children growing up. I was very, very shy, but I practiced this skill over and over. So I really do believe this is a skill that can be practiced and taught. But we tend to get trapped in our own minds about how we're appearing to others when we're in front of a room. And we get really, really worried about how we're presenting. Are we presenting right? Do we know enough about our information? And I always teach leaders to be honest. When you can get out of your own head and bring your anxiety, nervousness down, you will automatically go to your natural state. And that is what should be showing up on every stage, every single presentation you give, is being able to tuck away all those nerves and fears and doubts that you have and just show up as your natural self. And that's how you naturally command a room, or you are able to present. But we tend to get stuck in our thoughts about over preparing and what will the questions be. And it's about building trust with ourselves that no matter what happens, you can take care of yourself and you can handle the questions and things of that. But we get stuck in the anxiety of the moment, I think, more than anything.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true. My favorite motto is just show up, because great things will happen. The hardest part about anything is showing up. And as soon as you're there, it just happens. You make it happen, you work through it, you figure it out. Even me having this podcast, I never thought I'd have a podcast, but I do. I'm having so much fun doing it. Was it perfect in the beginning? No, but I got better along the way. And now I'm speaking as well and doing different events and coaching clients, and you just show up. You just got to try it. So I love that piece. Absolutely.
It's a
Yeah,
practice to get to. Yeah.
it is a
Uh-oh.
practice. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, there's that sound. It is time for our fun questions. Are you ready for the fun questions?
I am. I'm so excited to hear these.
All right. So, our first question is, if you were an animal, what would you be and why?
This is so good. I think probably because I'm obsessed with animals. I always say if I wasn't doing the career I would be doing now, it would be something with animals. Ever since I was a little girl, I was obsessed with a white tiger. It was like my jam. I had all these different stuffed animals, and I just begged my parents always to take me to a zoo that had a white tiger. I remember I grew up in Iowa, and they took me all the way over to the Milwaukee Zoo to see this white tiger. And the week that we showed up, the white tiger was somehow like taken somewhere else for medical treatment or something. So their exhibit was closed. So then my
Oh,
parents had to
no.
research again. I know, it's so good. But there's something about the regalness of a tiger where they play this duality of, at some points we see a tiger of being this kind of, can be aggressive, like quite a roar. But there's also this very calm demeanor in the midst of all the chaos. I think of a tiger as being that calm one that can handle it all. And that has been, I would say, a staple of who I've been in rooms with people, especially being legal counsel for so long, or even doing what I do now. Amidst all the chaos, I'm that calm voice. And if I have to go into protection mode, I know how to do that too for somebody else. I love supporting who I support. So sometimes I have to be the roaring tiger. I don't know how loud my roar is, to be honest, but I would say the white tiger for me, Stacey.
Okay, more importantly, have you seen a white tiger in person yet?
Yes. Yes. Finally, we found one. And I can't remember where, but I've seen it a couple of times. But yes, we saw
That's
one.
awesome. I love that. And a white tiger is not something that I don't think a lot of people would choose. So I love how unique that is. And I love the different variables on the why. So thank you for sharing that. All
Mhm.
right, second question. If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
Yes, this is going to be a little bit unusual, I think, compared to where I think the question was supposed to go. But I would say being the most exceptional keynote speaker. That is something that I'm continuing to practice. I've practiced and I've been a keynote speaker for years, but I still am honing my skills every single day. I wish I could be like the best of the best in keynote speaking. So that's something I'm really looking forward to expanding my skills around, Stacey.
What I love about that is it's continuous learning. Like you said, you've been doing it for years. And even though someone may have been a senior leader for years or a first level leader for years, you have to continuously learn and strive to be the best. So I actually love that answer. So thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Jennifer, thank you so much for today. I think a lot of awesome nuggets for our listeners to take away from why you want to be a board member, what makes a good board member, how to build that harmony amongst your team and being a team member yourself, how to call out the real message in the room and what to do about that. Some really great nuggets. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Stacey. This has been such a joy.
And that concludes another episode of Leadership Moments. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights in what we shared today. Remember, leadership is not defined solely by titles or positions, but by the choices we make and the moments that shape us.
Embrace the challenges that come your way. They may be the very moments that propel you toward greatness. We'd love to hear your thoughts and stories as well. Connect with us on our website at leadershipmomentspodcast.com or through social media on Instagram at tap_be the game changer.
And Stacey Caster _. Remember, your leadership moment could be just around the corner, waiting for you to seize it. This is Stacey Caster, and what doesn't challenge you won't change you.
This is Tracy Ann Palmer, and be the change you wish to see in the world.